Yeah, good evening, Comrade McBelt and fellow Zimbabweans and compatriots.
Thank you very much, for joining us. Thank you very much, for responding. Yesterday, I was looking forward, to hear you make, your full address. But even though I heard you speak, here and there, but I knew that, looking at you and knowing you, I knew that, there's a lot, that you wanted, to say. So I'll give you this opportunity, Honorable Tendai Biti, if you can, speak to us.
Thank you very much, Gerald, and thank you for creating this platform to allow citizens to speak on an issue, the threat to our constitution, which personally I consider the biggest existential threat that our country has faced since independence, probably since Gukura Wundi. This is the threat to turn our country into a monarchy. This is the threat to turn our country into a dynasty, the Mafidi a dynasty. This is a threat to completely privatize our capacity as citizens to fight back. This is a threat to privatize and take away from us our sovereignty, our right to govern ourselves and to leave it monopolized by a cartel, uh, by a clique, and by a syndicate. And the unfortunate thing about this syndicate is that there's been a conflation between the political elite, the political syndicate, and, um, and a mafia syndicate that has been grabbing Zimbabwean assets legally and extra legally, that is engaged in massive looting through public tenders. So this is the crisis we are facing, a huge, humongous crisis. I think the starting point must be, what is this constitution? This constitution represents an agreement, a compromise between the people of Zimbabwe, which we ratified, which we agreed to in the referendum that was held in March of 2013, in respect of which 93% of the people that voted in that referendum, equivalent to about 3.2 million people, ascended to that new contract, a new constitution. This was after a period of 3 years, 4 years of protracted negotiations between and amongst the Zimbabweans, followed by two very contentious all stakeholders conference. So this was a people-driven process born from public participation, in respect of which there was symbiosis, there was alchemy between the end product and the people of Zimbabwe, in respect of which every Zimbabwean could identify with a certain structure, could identify with a certain principle. So if you're a war veteran, you would have been very proud to know that the preamble of that constitution celebrates the three great Chimurengas that we have had. You would have been very pleased to know that the founding values, one of the founding values we have in this country, is the founding values of the liberation struggle. Those of us who came from the democratic polity would have been impressed by articles such as Article 2.1, which says that the Constitution is the supreme law of the country, and any act, conduct, or law inconsistent with the same is invalid to that extent. So we sought to create a new Zimbabwe. We sought to create a new society. We sought to create a new discourse. We sought to create a new consensus. And one of those consensus that we sought was that we did not want to see the presence of an all-powerful authoritarian president, what Prince Duveko has said, an imperial president. So we cut the huge powers that President Mugabe had, which arose after the collapse and conflation in 1987 of the office of the erstwhile normative president in the form of Kenan Banana and the executive prime minister. So this new individual found himself having crown powers and executive powers to create a very powerful imperial president. So one of the things that we sought to deal with in 2013 was this edifice of an imperial president that had been created lazily in 1987 by conflating the crown powers found in the titular President, Comrade Sodindo Banana, and the executive powers of a prime minister. Another thing that we sought to deal with was the issue of power transfer, the issue that the state could not regenerate, the issue that we had a president who had been in power for 34 years and seemed to want to go on forever. And connected to that, inextricably connected to that, was the issue of succession. It was clear that we had a succession battle, just like now. So to deal with these issues, we created the term of office provision, the limited terms of office provision. And if you ask me, what is the most important basic structure of this constitution? It is actually the provision limiting the term of office of the country's chief executive officer, the president. Because 5 years is a very small period of time in one's lifespan. And if we like you and we have to give you another term, 10 years is a very small period in time. What do time limits do? Time limits encourage accountability, because when you are elected in office, you know very soon that you will be a civilian. So you will restrain yourself. You will act with deference. You will act with a deterrence. Because one day you are powerful, and the next day you are an ordinary wananchi walking in the streets of Harare or Bulawayo. Another thing to deal with the issue of transfer, we created the issue of the running mates, and we made 2 of them. So the issue of the unresolved succession issue was settled by creating a running mate to run with the president, to be elected by the president. Of course, this was unpopular in certain circles who saw a running mate as a second descender of power. But what they didn't know was that Zimbabweans were creating a new trajectory of certainty and stability. Because wherever you have succession uncertainty, succession ambiguity, you make inevitable and unavoidable conflict, including, as we saw in 2017, the implosion of a military coup. But our constitution was much more than all these things. There were other things that were dear to citizens, which are still important now. One of them, of course, is the issue of devolution. One of them is the issue of transparency and accountability around our financial resources codified in sections such as 300 of the Constitution. One of them is the issue of the land question codified in Chapter 16 of the Constitution of Zimbabwe. One of them are the principles of government that you find in Chapter 9 of the Constitution. One of them is the 4 pillars of the Constitution that include the Human Rights Commission, the Anti-Corruption Commission, the Gender Commission, the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission. These 50 state institutions were meant to create an additional checks and balance to the traditional tripod of power between parliament, executive, and the judiciary. So it was a modern, progressive constitution. Now I come to the present threat. ZANU-PF does not have the unilateral right of seeking to amend a basic structure of the constitution, namely the term of office provision. And those of you who are familiar with our constitution, it's not just the president who had terms of office, judges had terms of office. Security sector big chiefs, they've got terms of office. There's a limited terms of office of the commander of the army, the commander of the intelligence, the commissioner general of the police, the commissioner general of prisons, and other. That typifies how we valued this term office. And we said fine. In section 328, a term of office can be changed, but it can only be changed through a referendum. So firstly, 2/3 majority in parliament, and then through a referendum. But even if one were to succeed through this difficult task of a referendum, you'd require, so that change, that constitutional change, would not serve the incumbent. So in other words, we created a disincentive for an incumbent to push for a constitutional amendment that would not benefit him. We then said, if you are crazy enough and so driven, you hold an insatiable desire for power, you want it to benefit you, you have to go through another referendum. But this referendum and the first referendum cannot be held concurrently. So two separate referendum. That is the law. That is section 327, bracket 7 of the Constitution of Zimbabwe. Now, they are now trying to create what I've called legal prostitutionalism, dubious legal arguments to deal with and to try and subvert the constitutional provisions that there are terms of office and that you can't avoid them except two referendums. There are three variants of this schism to cheat and facilitate a coup against the constitution of Zimbabwe. The first variant is what you have seen in a document called the Breaking Barriers Initiative. That document proposes that we amend Section 91 of the Constitution of Zimbabwe to allow the president to be elected by parliament and not directly by the people of Zimbabwe. The BBI proposal proposes that we extend the term of office of the current parliament to 2035, not 2030. So according to the BBI, the next election will be held after 2035. According to this mendacious satanist proposal, the current president, Mr. Mnangagwa, will be deemed to have been elected in terms of the new constitution. And further, these amendments, the BBI amendments, must be implemented before the current president has served 3 years from August of 2023 when he was sworn in as president. The reason why the 3 years are important because our constitution is very clear in section 92 that a full term is 3 years and above. So they want to do this before he reaches 3 years so that they can pretend that he didn't serve any term to justify giving him a blank 5 years that gets you to 2030. Meaning that the proponents of the BBI would have wanted to see this constitutional amendment passed and actualized before December of 2025, when the president would have served 2 years and 3 months from August of 2023. Fortunately, it's no longer possible for that proposal because a constitutional bill has to lie in state for a minimum of 90 days, and we are nearing the year end, so that window is passed. The BBI proposal is dangerous because parliamentarians also fall into that category of people with term limits, because the term of parliament is fixed in terms of section 143 of the constitution, read together with section 158. It's a 5-year term calculated from the day that the president is sworn in to 30 days before the end of a full 5 years. In other words, if we had the election in August of 2023, then 5 years ends in August of 2028, and the election must be held on any day within the 30 days from 23 August 2028. That's the term of office of parliament. So you would also need a referendum to extend the term of parliament to either 2030 or to 2035. So it doesn't work. It's with great respect, a horrible argument that cannot hold water. My biggest disappointment lies in one or two of the individuals associated with this process. I had so much respect for some of them. I shan't mention their names, but I think they've left our people down, which is why I always argue that we cannot trust individuals, and we should build institutions on the basis of trust because you never know how an individual can turn up tomorrow. So that's the first option. The second option that they have, which I suspect is going to be pushed by the Minister of Justice, is just a simple amendment to the Constitution to simply extend, excuse me, the term of office of the President and Parliament to 2030, and then argue that we don't need, we've not extended terms, we've just extended time limits. There is a dubious argument that is now being made between a time limit and a term limit. The genesis of this distinction derives from a constitutional court judgment called Max Mupungu and others versus Minister of Justice and others, in respect of judges and the controversy around the Chief Justice, which Prince Duveko referred to. The Justice Patel and the majority of the Supreme Court made this distinct provision only in relation to judges between a time limit and a term limit. But that same judgment makes it clear that for everything else, including the president and commanders of the army, they can't avoid the process in Section 328 of the Constitution. So I find it something disturbing that people will actually rely on a judgment that actually deals effectively and defeats their own argument. The third strange option is the option coming from someone that I had so much respect for, and that is Mr. Tawanda Nyambirai. He has earned his respect, and we as Zimbabweans respected him. Mr. Nyambirai now suddenly says there's a lacunae, there's a gap in our constitution, that there is ambiguity about the definition of a term limit, that we don't know. The constitution is ambiguous about whether it's 5 years or 7 years. And to the extent that there's this lacunae or deficit, there's nothing that prevents Parliament from simply declaring that the term of office of the president is 7 years or 8 years without the need of a referendum. Now, this is downright dishonest, because the Constitution is very clear in Section 91, in Section 95, in Section 143, in Section 158 of what a term of Parliament is, what a term of the president is 5 years. Even Mr. Mnangagwa himself, in the interview that you, Gerald, referred to with Christine Amanpour, he recognizes that one is 1 5-year term, which can be extended if you are re-elected. So the total absolute period you can serve as head of state is 10 years. When citizens think this law, I think it's a disaster. You know, I'm a Christian, and for someone who purports to be a Christian to think this law, it's reflective of the corrosive effect of money and bribery that is sunk in to our economy. So these three submissions don't hold water at all, and I thought I would simply deal with them. So we saw the brutality of the police, the brutality of state agents, the burning of Sapes Trust, the destruction of Gilbert Mbwende's premises the day before yesterday, his house in Highfield. But I'm pleased that what I saw yesterday from the colleagues that we were playing hide and seek with the police yesterday, my brother Job Scala, Prince Duveko Sibanda, the comrades in Bulawayo, Senator Timba, Advocate Gumbo, Obed Masaraure, Jacob Ngaribvume, Munyaradzi Gwisai, and the thousands and thousands of people that I saw yesterday. I want to assure ZANU-PF, I want to assure Mr. Mnangagwa that Zimbabweans will not allow this, and it is regrettable that a man who was protected to protect the Constitution, a man who has a duty to protect the Constitution, is now abandoning and desecrating that Constitution. An institution, Parliament, elected to protect the Constitution, in terms of section 114, 116, 117, is now singing and twerking as they were doing shamelessly to defend that constitution. We, the ordinary Wanainji of this country, are prepared to pay the ultimate price with our own lives to defend this constitution. I thank you very much, Gerald McBelt.
Wow, thank you very much. Thank you very much, for that, for giving us, the three possible that you said, one of it is no longer because of, the time frame. But can I ask you on the argument presented in the BBI, or on the argument that speaks to a full term, somebody serving 3 years and above would have served, the full term, and this BBI was envisaged to come into effect. That proposal was being envisaged to come into effect by the 22nd of December, 2025. And now, with what you said, that we've got a 90-day period that a bill needs to be, consulted, on, brought to the public, etc, etc. So if you're looking at that time frame, it is 2 years and 3 months, and on the understanding that a full term is 3 years and above, there is exactly about 9 months, period. Can they not try to push this Agenda 2030 via that route, which says the president, which says that he has not served, the full 3 years, and therefore they can, manipulate that and say whatever period that they would want, to then use to say that his second year now starts from maybe 7 months, down the line, from now to the 7 months, to the corresponding 7 months into, in 2030. Is that route still, possible, or you're saying that because of the time that is needed to go through everything that needs, to be done, that route is no longer, feasible for them?
Well, their holy grail is the year 2030. So
Yes.
that is what they have been pushing. So if they want Mnangagwa to be president until 2030 on the basis of the Nicodemus BBI submissions, then he has to be president from 1st of January 2025, meaning that the constitutional amendment would have been passed by December of 2025, in a few months' time. However, the BBI formula is still operative as long as they can try and push a bill before August of 2026. But it will no longer be 2030, it will now be 2031. But whatever formula that they want to use, whether the Nyambirai formula, whether the Ziambi formula, whether the BBI formula, an extension of time, the definition of term limit in section 328 simply means that any additional day from your original package of 5 years is deemed to be an extension. Therefore, you can't avoid the imperator of section 328. Therefore, you can't avoid double referendum. The first referendum to alter the term limit, the second referendum to have it benefit you. And as Prince has said, it's and as we keep on emphasizing, it's impossible to push this process. Zimbabweans will not allow this. They're totally against this, which is why anyone pushing this agenda is only pushing this country to an implosion, because you can't seek to push something that is impossible without expecting an impossible reaction in the form of an implosion. So the legal arguments which I've dealt with here are just an excuse of trying to do what they want to do. But the bottom line is that it is a constitutional coup d'etat, and we will not accept that. And thank God, the majority of war veterans, the majority of state institutions in this country, the majority of citizens in this country, overwhelmingly are totally and absolutely against this, obscene constitutional incest.